Hey, welcome to our podcast. My name is Kennedy Roberts. I'm a sophomore elementary education major from Haymarket, Virginia.
Hi, my name is Besiant Phillips. I'm a elementary education major from Los Angeles, California, and I am a sophomore.
Hi, my name is Trinity Thomas. I'm a third year elementary education major and I am from Raleigh, North Carolina.
Sure. Hi, my name is Asia Salaam. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm an elementary education major and I'm a sophomore.
Okay, so when most people hear the word assessment, they immediately think of tests and grades. But assessment is so much more than that. At its core, assessment is simply a way for teachers and students to check for understanding and guide learning forward. A strong assessment always starts with a clear purpose. Teachers need to know exactly why they're assessing. Is it to check what students already know, to guide instruction, or to evaluate mastery at the end of a unit? Without a clear purpose, assessment loses direction. We need clear learning targets. Students should understand what they're aiming for, whether it's mastering multiplication, writing a strong thesis statement, or analyzing a historical event. When students can see the target, they're much more motivated to hit it. Then comes sound design. This means creating assessments that are fair, reliable, and actually measure what they're supposed to. For example, if you want to know whether students understand the causes of the Civil War, don't just ask them to memorize dates. Give them a chance to explain, compare, or analyze so the assessment truly reflects their understanding. And finally, without effective communication, feedback should be timely, specific, and actionable, helping students see what they did well and where they can grow. It's not just about giving a grade, but about opening up a conversation that moves learning forward. When these things come together, clear purpose, clear targets, sound design, and effective communication, assessment becomes less about judgment and more about growth. It becomes a tool that empowers both teachers and students to succeed. So when I reflect on that, it makes me think about assessment in a way that really changes how I see teaching. When I was younger, I thought assessments were just the end of the learning process, a grade on a paper, a test at the end of a unit, or a score that made me feel judged. But now I realize assessments are really about growth and not judgment. They're checkpoints along the journey, helping both teachers and students see where we are and where we need to go next. The idea of having a clear purpose really stands out to me. It reminds me that teachers shouldn't just give a quiz just because, but because there's a specific skill or concept that they want to check in on to see where their students are. And when students know the clear targets what success looks like for them, it takes away some of the confusion. Instead of feeling like they're guessing what's on a test or just picking random answers, there's actually purpose behind what they're getting tested on. I also think about sound design, how important it is that assessments truly measure learning and not just memorization. That makes me reflect on my own learning, the times I've really grown where I had to apply knowledge, explain my thinking, or solve a new problem, not just fill in a test. And then there's communication. Honestly, feedback is one of the most powerful parts of assessment. A grade might tell you how you did, but feedback tells you how to get better. That's where teachers can really make a difference by making assessment a conversation and not just a score.
Yeah, so thank you, Kennedy, for that. What does effective communication mean in like the context of assessment? Because I feel like when I hear that term, I really do kind of get like a little bit confused because like what are we talking about when we are talking about communication? To kind of keep it short, it's not enough for teachers to kind of like collect grades or scores. What really matters here is like how those results are shared and used to help students grow. And we kind of see like with the fourth key, the book explains that like effective communication has like three full layers, and that's clarity for students, clarity for teachers, and clarity for others. And what I mean by others is like parents, the administrators. We really want to make sure everybody is understand understanding what they're getting into. And this chapter specifically, it emphasized feedback as like really the heart of communication. And I feel like feedback should be timely first off. We want to make sure that when kids are asking questions, or if they're confused about anything, we're telling them in enough time, so then we're um, clearing things up while they're learning is still fresh in their minds. I don't want a kid to come up to me and ask me a question at the beginning of the day and I'm not giving them an answer until it's lunchtime, because now they don't even remember like what I'm talking about. So you want to make sure, like, when you're clarifying things for students, it's timely. You want to make sure it's specific, and it's tied to a learning target, and it's not just, oh, you did it, great job. You want to make sure they're reaching a goal, and we want to make sure that it's let's say actionable, and that students should really know like their next step when it comes to things like this. I feel like it also warns against like harmful communication practices, like really giving grades with no explanation. I feel like when we see teachers in movies and stuff, we really see teachers just giving out grades and not, giving like a reason behind kids' grades. And I feel like even when a kid does get a bad grade, the teacher just gives them the bad grade and expects for them to come to them about why their grade looks like this. No, we need to go and reach out to students. Hey, what happened here? You know what I mean? Like things like that. And I feel like the chapter, it ties communication back to student involvement, and students, sorry, they need to use assessment to use assessment results themselves, and they need to see, okay, I need to work on this, or I need to get a tutor to work on this. I feel like in like my classroom, if I ever do start teaching, or when I do start teaching, that I believe that my kids should always have like, how can I get better mentality, and I always want to make sure I have an open space for them to kind of grow and have that sort of thing. And now I feel like I kind of want to think critically about basically what I just said. And I feel like the major strength of like the key four, I guess, is how it reframes communication as a two-way process. It's not just a teacher delivering a grade. It's a dialogue where, students are invited to reflect, respond, and act. And this is like really powerful because it turns assessment into a tool for motivation instead of judgment. And another strength is the emphasis on usefulness. Grades without feedback does nothing for learning, like nothing at all. Like I'll get a grade. Let's say, I think like probably the last time I actually ever got a grade back and I saw it on a paper was probably like junior year of high school, and I got a grade back and I saw it and I was just like, well, okay, I just did bad on that, so I'm just not a good person at that, and I just moved on. And it's because a teacher didn't come to me and say, hey, you just need to work on this. This doesn't mean that you're always going to be doomed in that subject. It just means that you just need a little bit of time to work on this, and I'm going to help you work on it so that, you can grow and develop as a student. And I feel like if I would have got that, I would have never felt like, oh, I'm always just going to be doomed in this subject of math. I'm always doomed in algebra. You know what I mean? Like those sorts of things, it's not good for kids. And I feel like by stressing clarity and actionability, it's going to push teachers to think about how communication impacts actual student progress. And that said, there are some limitations. While the idea of effective communication sounds very straightforward, it's hard to do it consistently in real classrooms. Large classroom sizes and, pressure on time and standardized testing often push teachers towards quick scores rather than just meaningful conversations. And I feel like we need to have more meaningful conversations with kids about, their grades and how they're doing, because without that, they're always going to think that they're like never going to do good in one specific subject. And finally, I feel like feedback can sometimes demotivate if not delivered carefully. Even well-meant comments can feel like harsh and discouraging if students are like sensitive or they're already struggling. And I feel like this just means that teachers just need strong relational skills, not just assessment kind of know how. And so, overall, Key 4 is just a critical reminder that assessment data is not only as good as the way it's communicated, it has a potential to empower, but without care, it can do the opposite.
Hey, thank you. That was really, really good. Now I'm going to touch more on motivation to learn and goal orientation. So the student's motivation to learn equals their orientation. It depends on it. And it's odd because students often shift focus from their goal to the task itself. Like, for example, if a student is in science class and the teacher shows these two chemicals mix and make a different color, say they make purple. Sometimes the student only understand, oh, this and this make purple, but they don't understand the chemical reaction behind it. They get caught up, I guess, kind of in the aesthetic of the lesson. And specifically younger kids, especially being elementary education, younger kids, it's hard to keep them engaged and then also keep them on lesson because you kind of have to throw a lot of things that are fun that they can actively engage in, things like that. And they get caught up kind of, I guess, like I said, in the aesthetic of it. Um, a good way to keep students goal oriented is student assessment. It means they can track their own progress, they can see their own improvement, and sometimes that's just the main point. They need to see themselves doing better. And then hmm, students who adopt a learning goal approach and focus their effort on improving their work and getting better. So when a student has a certain goal they're here to meet, I guess kind of taking them along each step and keeping them there is what keeps the student motivation.
So, chapter one lays the foundation for understanding true purpose of the assessment. The author explains that assessment is not just a way to measure or record what students have learned, but is also a tool that helps students improve while they are still learning. A major theme that I learned in this chapter is the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning. Assessment of learning is summative and usually happens at the end of instruction. It tells us what students know, but it does not help them grow. Examples include end of unit tests, state exams, and report card grades. Assessment for learning, however, is formative and ongoing. It happens during the learning process and provides information that both students and teachers can use to make adjustments. The goal is not just to judge performance, but to guide learning forward. This chapter emphasizes the active role of students in assessments. Students should not be passive recipients of grades, but should instead learn how to evaluate their own work, reflect on their progress, and set mindful goals. When students are involved in assessment, they become more motivated, confident, and responsible for learning. Teachers play a critical role in making this shift. Instead of simply assigning grades, teachers should clearly communicate learning targets, share what quality work look like, and provide descriptive feedback that helps students understand how to improve. Reading this chapter made me think differently about assessment. I realized that I often only thought of assessments as grades or tests, but this chapter showed me that assessments can actually help students grow if they are used the right way. I really connected with the idea of involving students in their own learning because while students understand expectations and see where they need to improve, they are more motivated to try. It also made me reflect on the teacher's roles, how important it is to give clear goals and feedback that students can actually use. I can see how this approach can make the classroom feel more supportive and less stressful, but I also understand it might be challenging to move away from the traditional grading. Overall, this chapter made me think about how assessment can be more about growth and less about judgment.
Okay, so I think you all gave great answers. I loved you all's reflections. So I just had a question. How might a teacher's approach to assessment change if they view assessment as a tool for growth rather than a tool for judgment. And I guess I can go first. So for me as a teacher, like I know that tests are something that my students probably won't like or that they're not as effective as a tool for measurement of if they understand the material, because not everybody is a great test taker. So instead, I'm going to use a project-based learning model in my classroom, meaning like instead of doing an end of unit test, we might do a project or we might have a Socratic seminar or a discussion. So because I can still assess if they know the material without them having the pressure of doing assessments. So what do you guys think about this?
Kennedy, I actually really liked your answer because I feel like a lot of times when it comes to like those kind of like serious test assessments, students get very nervous and they tend to mess up in that area, based like generally just based on nerves. So I think things like doing school projects and things like that, like big end of the year projects, especially where they can be in a group, is a really good way to assess them at the end of the year.
Yeah, basically, like I love your question, Kennedy, by the way. And I agree with you, Trinity. Like, honestly, like big assessments, they are super duper scary. Like, it doesn't matter if we're just talking about elementary students, it doesn't matter if we're talking about middle school students, high school students. End of the year tests are very, very scary. And it's like, I feel like we're stressing kids out. We're telling them, hey, go home and study everything from the year. And we're just expecting them to know everything off the first day. Like, it's not, it's, honestly, it's just not realistic. And I feel like, yeah, doing things like projects, things that like, kids don't really have to stress about. And they've been working all year. Doing, it just helps them remember things more, making projects more memorable. We're just trying to make sure that kids are remembering the content that we give them. So when it does come up to those standardized tests and things like that, they're like, "Oh, I know this because I did a project when I was in like 3rd grade that, reminded me of how to do this." So it doesn't, make them have to stress out because, they remember doing things like this. And we didn't send them home for a week and say, "Hey, study for this test because I just want to make sure you know all the content." No, if you just do a little project, that'll show me enough that you know exactly what I've been teaching you from day one, and that's completely fine.
Okay, so my next question was, what are some ways teachers can make learning targets clear to students so that they feel motivated to reach them? And so for me, like I know like a lot of districts like require teachers to like put the learning target on the board. And I remember when I was in school, like I would see it on the board and I didn't even know it was asking me. So I feel like if as a teacher I'm going to try to break it down because I want to teach elementary school, like specifically like first or second grade. So for them, I'm gonna break it down and use simpler language and then maybe have them like recite it or like repeat it before we start the lesson. And then while they're doing their work, I'm gonna apply it to like real world examples, such as things that like are relevant to their lives so that they relate more to the standard, so that when their parent or an administrator asks them, what did they learn today? They can relate it to something in their life so it's more memorable for them and more relevant so that they actually learn the material. And so that when it's time for the assessment or like the project, they can use what they learn from the standard that was broken down and made more relevant in their project. And so that they actually learn something and take something from my class.
Okay, I really agree with the breaking up, I guess you could say the objective, like breaking up into the individual lessons instead of trying to, I guess, cover everything all in one big section. I feel like that'll definitely help them understand better and definitely help them set their own personal goals, which is kind of the whole point, the whole getting the motivation to learn. So yeah, that was a really good question, Kennedy.
Yeah, I definitely like remember being like little and looking at SLOs on the whiteboard and being like, literally, what is SLO? What does this mean? But one thing I do also remember is being in the 5th grade, and every week we would go over SLOs, and we would have to recite, our learning outcomes. And I would be like, at first I was like, what is this? But then it was just like, the whole purpose of my teacher teaching me, it like cognitively in my brain, I would just always remember that, the whole point of my teacher teaching me is so that, at the end of this lesson, I can know that, I know how to use like, I don't know, like my shapes are, I know how to, I know what perimeter is or what area is. And I feel like when we break down to kids, or like when we tell kids every day, hey, this is what I want you to get out of this, or this is our objective at the end of our lesson, it makes things a little bit more easier. So yeah, I think that was a great question, Kennedy.
Can I add on it really quick?
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, go ahead.
So another thing that like from my own personal learning skills, I know that repetition is key. So when we are teaching, especially I think all of us said we're elementary majors, well, elementary education majors, and we're teaching younger kids, they're not going to get everything on the first go round, you know? So a lot of things need to be heard or taught multiple times so that way our students are really understanding what we're teaching. So I really think that repetition, I think everybody kind of touched on that in one way or another, that we really need to be, talking about these things multiple times so that way all of our students can really get those things embedded into their brains.
Okay. All those answers sounded great. And again, Kennedy, thank you for the two wonderful questions. So the question I have for y'all is, what do you think are some of the most common reasons that students lack motivation in school? And personally for me, and what I've learned from like former classes, like my ethics of teaching class with Dr. Robinson, is that students don't have any motivation in a place they don't feel comfortable, especially with their educator, with their teacher. So it's that, and then like what I mentioned earlier, people getting more focused on the aesthetics, like things like, I don't know if y'all know what y'all played Blook It in high school, but that was like a big thing we did in school. And I feel like a lot of people focus more on winning the game and getting the coins than actually learning any of the answers. And sometimes that type of memorization can be good in certain topics like history or something like that, or like science. But in areas like math where you're solving equations, those type of things just don't work for students. And so there has to be alternative ways to kind of reach that same goal, but not in that way.
Can you repeat your question for me one more time, please?
I'm sorry. What do you think some of the most common reasons students lack motivation in school?
I honestly like growing up, like I always like school always seemed like a negative thing, like school, like the first week was fun, but after like the first week, all the students would kind of lose motivation to actually like go to school. So I think like a lot of students look at it as negative.
In my opinion, the reason that students lack motivation, especially when you get to like middle and high school, like elementary school, like most kids are excited to learn and they like coming to school. But I feel like as they get older, they lose motivation because school's not relevant. Like when I was in school, I can't even remember like one class that I was like, wow, this is really relevant to my life. Like I really enjoyed this class until I got into my education classes. And it was something that I was like passionate about. So I feel like students lack the connection, one, to teachers that look like them and that know how to teach them in a culturally responsive way, but also to the material because a lot of the material is not created with them in mind and what their lifestyles like, where their neighborhood is, those types of things. So I feel like they lack connection to their educators and the material.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Kennedy. But I think, like, for me, definitely growing up, like, I was definitely that kid who, I'm not gonna lie, I was definitely kind of like a problem child. But I think the main reason why I kind of grew uninterested in school so early in my educational career, I'm talking about I was uninterested by second grade, was just because of public embarrassment. And I'm pretty sure I went over this in somebody went over this in one of my classes, but I was just like getting embarrassed by teachers daily. And it was because I had like a mental condition where it was just like I couldn't sit still. I couldn't, just like not stop like talking and things like that. And I had to stimulate my mind in a certain type of way. And a lot of teachers, they just were like, "Oh no, you're just a class clown. Like you always just want to joke around and you always just want to disrupt the class and things like that." And it was like, no, I literally cannot sit down without moving, things like that. And I just feel like no teacher actually took the time out to actually, assess me in the correct way and let me know that, like, you know what you're doing is okay, and take me to the school psychologist and actually get me assessed. And I feel like with that, I was getting embarrassed almost every day. So I would just literally just get up and walk out of class just because I was just uninterested in everything. I didn't want to sit in class and be embarrassed by my teacher again and have her, start, yelling at me because I can't sit still in my chair or I'm always getting up to go get a piece of tissue. Like, I think, when we embarrass kids or we tell them like, we yell at them in the middle of a lesson, those things, like, it really does make kids uninterested, and it will make kids just be like, you know what, school was just always embarrassing for me, so that's the reason why I just dropped out. So yeah, I definitely agree with Kennedy there, and with you too, Trinity.
Hey, those were some great answers. Thank y'all so much. Does anybody else have any other questions they want to ask?
I think I'm okay. I think that we did so good tonight and
Yes, definitely.
putting
This was
in
a really good discussion.
effort. Yeah, definitely putting in effort tonight. I think that we went over a lot of good and bad things about teaching, specifically, and I hope that it left you guys with some questions to think about, and some things you probably would want to add to your own classroom. Um, and yeah, that's all I have to say. Anybody else?
I think we had a great discussion. I loved all you guys' points, and I think we really took a deep dive into assessment as educators, and I think we're all going to be the type of educators who think of assessment as a tool to empower our students and not to judge them or make them feel like to tear them down or make them feel less than. We want to use it as a tool of empowerment. And I think we all are going to be educators that do that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that was very well put, Kennedy. Well, if that's all we have, then we're all done for the day.